So what exactly is your beef with Pacific Rim? It's
Um,
now your second walkthrough.
I
So like
know,
what
and
like what
it just confirmed how much I hate it.
but why? Like what do you hate about it?
So I made notes because I was like, okay, I want to like make sure I can articulate exactly why I hate it. It's for me, it's the characters are so bad that it makes it unenjoyable. Like the characters are just such terrible cardboard stand-ups, and the acting is so bad. The dialogue is horrible. That like
Wait a minute.
I
Hold on.
can't
Hold on.
tolerate like the I couldn't I quit I was waiting to get to the point where they finally go and attack the breach, and I'm like, I can't take this anymore. I hate all of these people. And I quit
That
preemptively.
is that's absolutely absurd to me because it's like uh the mad scientist is great.
They're
The
just like slapstick, useless
The
cardboard
super
cutout.
rich guy.
yeah, Ron Perlman is great.
Ron
Like
Perlman's
the
good. I like him. He's
Ron
weird.
Perlman's great. Idris Elba is okay, but that's the thing. I think that you have this idea that everything has to be high art, whereas like I went into it expecting spectacle, and I was like, yeah, that's fine. That's what I got. Like I got a spectacle of a movie, and I think that what happens, especially with Pacific Rim, is that a lot of people want to ascribe more to it than is necessary. Like I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's like especially when
Uh-huh.
it came out, it got a lot of praise for like them not having the two main characters get together in a romantic sense,
But
and it's
they
like
did. That's also bullshit.
but well
Well,
no they didn't. They actually are just friends.
yeah, but he
But it's
treats
like
her like this girlfriend basically through the whole thing. Like so I would push back on the idea that just because it's like supposed to be this comic sort of thing that it should that it gets away with having like shitty characters because like for example my main complaint like of the
yeah, what like
characters.
I because I also don't remember hating the characters.
Yeah,
So I'm like,
I
oh,
can
what
go
is
through that because I was thinking about each one as I was listening to them. The protagonists, the two protagonists are these boring, hypermasculine white dudes who have literally no personality other than being two bros. And then when one of them dies in the first like 5 seconds, that you don't even care about him. Once one of them dies, the other guy they immediately skip 5 years and they're like, oh, now he's this hardened, grizzled guy, and he's like, so torn by what happened to him, even though his brother was on screen for 2 seconds. I can't tell him apart from the other three blonde white dudes that are the other main characters. So there's like the Australian guy with the dog, the protagonists. They all look exactly the same. They're all like macho, assholes. So like I have no connection to any of the protagonists. And then the Japanese girl, like I don't remember her name. She just exists for him to fawn over, basically, and for her to be like a foil to his like aggressiveness. So like everything he says to her is like this avuncular, like, oh, you don't know what you're doing. Let me be the guy who is teaching you everything. And she's just like this empty vessel for his
right?
aspirations.
But he's wrong. That's the thing.
I
It's
know, but
like
it's like how long is it? 2 hours? It didn't even get to that point till like the last 15 minutes.
no, but like okay, hold on. I actually think that the movie would
Oh,
have been better if it had focused on the Japanese girl. Because could you
yes,
imagine like
agree.
like starting the movie with that scene with her with the shoe,
Yeah,
and
that was
then
the
like
only good
Oof.
scene in the
yeah,
movie.
and like that'd be a great way to start the
Yeah,
movie, and then follow her journey, and then
I
it's
would have
like
loved that.
see, yes, exactly. But also, she is not a bad character at all. Like she has very effective moments in the movie, and
He's just such a terrible. She's like
I
so
think
bad.
so. So I actually think that she does a good job of like kind of shedding off like the stereotypes of a female character. It's like he wants to put her in that box, and she rejects that pretty readily and consistently throughout the movie,
The movie
which is
takes way too long to do that. Like I remember, I quit this time. Let's see, what just before? Oh, when they were fighting in the water before going to the breach. Um, I don't remember how many minutes were left. I was like, I can't do this anymore. And even at that point, she's still just his like girl sidekick,
I don't agree with that.
and that's like
I
an
just don't
hour
agree
and
with that.
40 minutes in.
I don't agree with that at all. I think it's because the camera follows him, you expect him to be the protagonist. I don't necessarily take that approach when it comes to movies.
uh she just doesn't say anything that, and she's basically like also this paternalist prop, like Idris Elba, whose dialogue is terrible, and I'm shocked that Idris could not save this movie. Like the whole struggle between him and the protagonist is like, I guess, their control over her to some degree. You know, like he won't let her be the co-pilot, like as if she has no volition of her own. And it's just like, I don't care about the two of them complaining. It's like the movie's male interactions can be summarized by the two random white dudes who I can't tell apart punching each other over the Japanese girl in that one scene. And I was just like, this is such crap when I got to that scene.
See, I can't agree with you. I actually think that you do bring up a good point in the character's agency.
Yeah.
Like, but at the same time, like, it ultimately is her who makes that decision to do that thing. So I don't think that
Yeah.
argument necessarily has a lot of weight to it, you know? Like, if it were, you know, Idris Elba is the one who makes the decision for her, or
But he
generic white guy
allows
who
her to
makes the
become a
decision.
pilot, remember? Like when he says like, oh, who's gonna be your number two, basically he like green lights it. Whereas before, if he said no, she wouldn't do it. Like
Well, I think that's because he is literally like the leader in that situation, so it has to go through him. You
yeah.
know,
But I mean like
but
from the perspective of like the narrative, at the end of the day he's the one allowing her, the paternalist, like fake dad, you know? I just and
yeah,
then
I don't necessarily
You
see
leave
that as
fake dad alone.
gatekeeping. I see that as
yeah.
like him, like her proving herself to him as a soldier despite his paternal feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Well, and then okay, and then do we, because I can't connect to any of the characters, right? When I have 20 minutes of giant robots fist fighting, I'm super into that. Like I think that's cool. But it's like, what's at stake for me? Nothing, because I could care less if they die. In fact, I'm rooting on the aliens to kill them.
See that is actually, I think, the main point that we're getting into of
Yes.
why you hate it, is that if you can't, and that's actually a very important point to keep in mind, is that if you don't care about the people inside the giant robot,
Yes.
you don't care about the giant robot.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I just see
that's
it
an
as
excellent point.
like you're you're not there for the plot, you're there for the fighting robot.
Well, I could do that, right? But then it's like, why not just mute the thing, fast
Yeah.
forward over all the talking, right, and just watch them fight, which I would be okay with because it's
don't know,
incredible.
because
Yeah, Chris, I don't agree with that sentiment, because it's like, I don't watch the good Star Wars, by the way. I don't watch the good Star Wars for the lightsaber fights and the speed races and stuff like that. That's what the prequels ended up trying to do,
Mhm.
is replacing, and that's why actually you see the difference between good characters and shallow characters. And obviously the prequel trilogy is like all spectacle, right? Like
Yeah.
it is all set pieces, and again, I would imagine that the other sequel trilogy is very similar to that. I just haven't seen it, but I imagine
It's
that it is
bad.
all big set
Yeah.
pieces and action points and shit like that.
100% correct.
But then why people look at the original trilogy so fondly is because the characters are so fucking strong
Yeah, that's what I
that they
want.
remember. Yeah,
Like when I think of the animes that I like that involve giant robots, usually the character, you're rooting for them. Like I'm thinking of, okay, so that video game, and its story is pretty shitty to begin with. It's on PlayStation 1 and it's a mecha game. Oh, what is it called?
Come on.
there's a bunch of them. So
Yeah.
Armored Core Front Mission.
It looked
Okay.
really cool.
okay, Armored Core, Front
No.
Mission 3,
No.
Xenogears,
It's similar to that, but it's not that.
Xenosaga, is that what it's called? Hold on.
It had two. There were two versions of like two. It was the main one, the sequel. It was incredible for PlayStation 2, PlayStation 1 graphics rather.
Dude, it's got to be Xenogears.
No, it's not. I know it's not Xenogears because I knew the people who love that in my group. It's a lesser known one. Basically, it's like 3D. You pilot like the kind of like a mech that looks like a Xenogear mech. Your character's name is Dingo, I think.
Okay, that is a PlayStation 2 game, and that's Zone of the Enders 2.
Oh, Zone of the
Yeah,
Enders
sorry,
was
it is
alright.
PlayStation. Is it PlayStation? Yeah, it's PlayStation 2. Yeah, yeah.
PlayStation
So Zone of the
2.
Enders, like that's one where it's like, okay, the story is shitty, but at least like I liked the protagonist and I was rooting for him to succeed, you know?
Yeah. Yes.
Whereas like in Pacific Rim, like I am not rooting for the main character. I could care less about him. And I think it's just because the order of the scenes is messed up. Like you're saying, if they started with the Japanese girl, right? And that trauma, that's great. Or if they let him suffer longer, because it's literally the first 5 minutes that his brother's killed. We don't know anything about the two of them. And then they skip 5 years. They don't even show that 5 year period. Just like 5 years have passed. Oh, and now we're going to recruit you
Oh.
back. So the status quo is exactly the same as when we started, other
So
than they blanket say
They
it's
did build a wall, though.
yes, a pointless wall. That was the
You know,
stupidest concept of the whole thing.
you know what might be more interesting is that if you
Oh,
show the generic white guy, if you show his suffering a little bit more,
yeah,
like if you gave him a little bit more depth through, like PTSD or the loss of his brother or like
yes,
conveying that in some way, I think that
that's what I
that's
wanted.
actually, yeah, I think that that's actually a far more effective way to do it. Yeah.
If you were, and I think what it would have worked great because I complained about. I keep calling her a Japanese girl. I'm sorry. I think her name's like Mako or something. I don't know.
Yes. I actually was on the wiki looking that up right now because I'm like,
No more of that.
this
I mean,
sounds real bad.
I don't take any blame for that. I blame Pacific Rim because she really is just the Japanese girl. She's like the one girl in the whole goddamn thing. So anyway, that aside.
Hey, wait, hold on.
Yes, I
Are
know
you
in the background there's like two other pilots that are women who get like a half a second of screen time.
okay?
And
I'm
then there were the
thinking
triplets.
specifically of the
Yeah.
Russian. The Russian one is the one that I remember
Right.
most.
Do they
Thank
even
you
does
very
she even
much.
have any dialogue? I don't even think so.
They
I
don't
think
need
it's in Russian, so you might not remember.
But my point is to your, which I think you're totally correct. Like, if for example they made him older, so like not as old as Idris Elba, give him like 10, 15 years, so he looks a little
Oh.
gray, then he would have the right to be avuncular to her, and you'd have the distance of it maybe not being as sexual because it is absolutely sexual through the majority of the film. Like that, everything their interactions are like, especially that fight for the training or whatever. Maybe at the end, like they changed the course of that, but she's just like his prop for most of it, you know?
That's actually a really interesting point. So you basically want a Last of Us, the
Yeah,
whole thing where it's like you want like a grayish, like
yeah,
you want some like gray muzzle on the generic white guy, and
exactly.
it's like yeah,
What if she was a
okay.
little girl? Like that would be fucking awesome. Like if what if she was actually still a little girl?
But I think isn't part of it like you have to have drift compatibility with someone.
Oh right,
Yeah.
yeah, to
So
make it
I
match.
think
Okay.
that's too much of a
Maybe make
difference in
her
terms,
16 then, so she just has enough like age to do it,
and like
but
make him like late
older.
30s or something like
Yeah,
that.
like even like late 30s. Then at least you can't see them as a couple, you know.
I guess part of it, or at least a very predatory couple.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Because it's like he's taking advantage of her lack of knowledge. It feels like, even though I know he's not supposed to be, but that's how it comes across, you know.
right,
This is just
right,
slowly becoming more and more Evangelion.
Right.
yeah, kind of. All right.
But at least now you understand, like, why I hate it.
Welcome to World Build with Us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. You've just sat through the prologue to our mecha episode that we have going on today. In our listener email this week, we have an email from Christopher who says, "Love the new format. However, I almost stopped listening after Chris said he liked Bright. Possibly the best example of exactly how to botch all aspects of world building." I completely agree, by the way. It's a bad movie and you should feel bad for liking it. Daniel redeemed the show by introducing Veronica Mars in the solar punk world. Way to go, Daniel. He goes on to say, since Daniel has some irrational hate of Pacific Rim, I thought you guys could do a world of kaiju versus mecha, or mecha in general, that would make good for a new setting. Christopher goes on to say some other things, but we'll leave it that. Thank you very much for your continued love and support. And remember that if you want to send us an email prompting us to do some other kind of world building setting, you can always email us at worldbuildwithus@gmail.com, or you can go ahead and shoot us a tweeter, twit. It's what are those things called? Oh, it's a DM, right? On Twitter at Let's World Build. Now, today we are going to create our own mecha world. Not necessarily mecha versus kaiju. In fact, I'd like to kind of explore what kind of a mecha genre we can get into here. But the overall gist of this episode is going to be mecha. And I am so excited because, man, you know what I fucking love? Giant robots. That's what I fucking love. So each of us are going to introduce 3 aspects of the world that are demonstrably true, or, a focus of the world in some way. So, Chris, why don't you go ahead and start us off with the first true fact about our mecha setting?
Mine had to do with the interaction between the pilot and the mech itself. I wanted it to be a full integration, so that they had to slip into kind of the sleeve of it. It becomes one thing, the nervous system and everything hooks up, and I wanted to be degrading. So uh, the longer you pilot, the less you are in touch with your humanity, and I wanted that to be something that would be explored in some sort of plot. That the longer the person fights in this thing, the less they have in touch with their own humanity, their emotions, as it kind of slowly gets replaced by thinking like a robot.
Oh, man. That brings
Yeah,
up all sorts of interesting aspects to the world. Uh, First
like
of all, that sounds a little bit like Iron Blooded Orphans, which is a Gundam spin-off where it's like they still have to physically jack into the robots and stuff like that and have essentially bio implants in like embedded in them. And moreover, like what what's to stop an evil person or government from just having robots pilot or like humans stay in their mecha long enough where they become robots? Like, why isn't that easier for control purposes? Like, what stops them from or is it a matter of it's a brain death type thing?
Ooh, good point. Like, do they want to retire someone? Because at one point, what if they, like, if free will is still there and self-preservation, does it become kind of like a rogue AI thing of where it's just like, all right, I need to only save myself. I am now the mech. So, why am I fighting for you guys again? Screw this. I'm just going to live on the moon.
I mean, it might be a matter of, since it's so dangerous to use the machine, it might be a matter of there being external forces that are forcing people to say, like, well, really, I have to use this even though it's dangerous because of some other greater consequence.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm just imagining that like every villain that ever exists in this setting is just someone who stayed in the mech for too
Too
long.
long, yeah.
Yeah, or like there's that one guy who's like, oh, he's been in the mech for so long, and now he's started his own rogue faction of other similarly incredibly talented pilots and
Oh,
stuff like
neat. I
that.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's like a lot
I
of possibility because of the fact that you have to like suffer to use your tool means that there's something really high at stake that makes you have to do that. You know.
I would probably argue the best way to kind of control this thing is to force retirement for mech pilots. Like you
Mhm.
only get, I'm not sure if it's time or missions or whatever, but there should be like the government or whoever's in control of these mechs are like, hey, look, you have a hard time limit. You
Yeah.
cannot do it after you're this age or you've been in for this many hours or whatever it may be, whatever arbitrary point. I think that that's probably a smart way to do it because then you can have that person who has free will who's like, all right, I'm going to put in the suit one more time, even though there's that risk of kind of assimilating into the AI.
Do you remember Blade Runner 2, the advanced Voight-Kampff test that they had in that movie, where they
Cell.
I
tested? What's
I
that?
never saw Blade Runner 2 Electric Boogaloo. I just
It's actually very good. Where it was just like,
Yeah,
man, you are so far off of baseline right now.
exactly. That's what I'm thinking would be a
You have,
perfect test for that.
you have 24 hours to get yourself back on page.
Yeah, that was just so good. I could see that working
wait a
for
minute.
these mechs.
That's a much cooler idea is if we have something that is like you have hunters. You're
Mhm.
hunting like mech pilots and stuff like that. That's
Oh,
a much cooler idea.
yeah. Maybe they used to be used for some purpose, and because of the consequences and what it's created, now you got to go hunt down the ones who have gone bad. You know.
Okay, Now we can add in Blade Runner into our mecha series. I'm
Yes.
already 100% fucking sold on this idea.
Also,
Like,
on record, Blade
that's
Runner
so
2,
cool.
greatest movie, one of the classics.
I haven't seen. I know I have to. I just haven't seen the new Blade Runner yet. I
Yeah,
just
it's good.
haven't gotten around to it.
It
There's
would
a lot
also
of movies I haven't seen that I really need to. Like, I have a list. I'm looking at it right now.
I would like to say that this Splinter group reminds me a lot of like Foxhound from Metal Gear and everything, where a bunch of like soldiers or mech pilots come together and they're like, "This is wrong, is what's happening to us." But it's not so much like a common goal, so much as they've just grown detached and see themselves as like a second branch of humanity.
Mm, that's cool.
Yeah, no, I like that idea a lot. Like, it's not so much that they consider themselves like superior, just different, and
Yeah.
also like their needs. Again, it's kind of similar to that of the replicants in
Hmm.
uh, Blade Runner. I think that's a really apt comparison.
Mm.
Yeah. So look at that, point one, Chris. You fucking
Nice.
started us off with a fucking crackerjack of a point, and
That was good.
so I'm going to preface my point with I've actually given most of my points to be fairly generic, or at least fairly vague. Like, normally I try and do at least one that's hyper specific, but because it's mecha, because you can go in almost any direction with it, I actually wanted to kind of keep it general. And I know that's lame, but I also have some interesting points that I want to point out. My one of which is I want politics to be a major focus in the setting itself. I think the best mecha stories that are being told have a major focus on something political, whether or not it be, for example, Iron Blooded Orphans has a focus on child soldiers. You have something like the clan system within Mech Warrior, which is all political, or you even have something like, oh God, or even Escaflowne with its it's steeped in government bureaucracy and all sorts of oh man, there's a lot going on in Escaflowne. I mean, I'm sorry, in Evangelion. Yeah, there's a lot to it. So I wanted one of my favorite mecha games of all time is Front Mission 3, and just watching the different political factions go to war, kind of pull the strings, that's one of the best parts in the story in that game is so good. That's one of the major things that I wanted to focus on. Yeah, one of the best things about that game is just watching that, like that political onion, kind of like you cut into the layers of the political machinations of everything in that game, and it's so good. So I again, fairly generic, I know, but I want politics to be a major point. I don't want it to be, rock'em sock'em real steel robots. I want it to be like, no, if those mechs are out there doing shit, it
Mhm.
means that there's a senator or like some kind of a world leader who is pulling the strings, making sure that that shit happens.
What I like about that is that it forces thought about economic concerns, which I feel like a lot of fantasy and sci-fi tends to not deal with. So they kind of like push it off to the side. But if there's a lot of political maneuvering, that means we've really got to think about, international relations and what resources are available and what they're actually like fighting for.
Going off of that, the other thing that I really like is that you now have conflict between the person who's behind the power and the
Mhm.
person who's actually piloting the mech
Yeah,
itself.
like
I
people can
think
be
that
pawns.
exactly, and I think that's a really important thing, and I think it says a lot about humanity in general, but also it's just important to realize, like, hey, this is at the end of the day, the people in those suits are people who are soldiers oftentimes, and they aren't necessarily the ones who are in charge of their own fate, that kind of thing.
One of the reasons why I was attracted to Mech Warrior is all the mythology of the clans that's kind of mentioned in the background, at least in Mech Warrior 2. And so, like, it always got me thinking, like, oh, there's got to be a lot of political maneuvering behind all this that I'm not seeing. And I'm just, like, the one guy on the ground fighting the war that's put in place. And so it immediately gives the world a sense of, like, hugeness. even though we didn't really know the specifics of all the maneuvering. You're just the dude on the ground executing the strategy.
I like the fact that part of the reasons that the world is the way that it is in MechWarrior is because there was the collapse of the Star League, and one guy decided to go out and be like, "Hey, you know what? We're not going to be used as pawns right now. We're gonna just go into the vastness of space," and that it caused all of these things to just cascade. Where there's then mercenaries, people are fighting, and then when the clans come back, it's just like, oh, they're all really skilled and they have a lot more mechs than we.
Yeah, yeah.
One of my favorite things about the Mech Warrior series as well is the code of chivalry that exists.
Hmm.
I think that having some kind of a code of conduct, you know, I mean, similar to like the Geneva Convention, I guess, but this is more mech specific, is having this idea that, like you can surrender and I will accept your surrender. You just have to get out of your mech and then we take it as, like bounty essentially. Or, similar to how it was done back in, medieval times, you'd essentially ransom off your equipment and stuff like that.
Hmm.
I think that in particular, I know that it's taken directly from medieval times, but I think that that's such a clever way to ensure that you don't have to die or you don't have to lose very expensive and rare equipment all the time.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the best conceits of that setting for sure.
And it definitely fills the world with a sense of like a sense of a flavor too, like because once you add like something like a chivalry code, that like there's a certain way that you're going to view interactions between factions. It sets a tone, which I like, rather than it just being an all-out firefight, where there's no
Yeah,
rhyme or reason.
it adds a sense of like an axiomatic sense to it where you're not going to go in and lose everything and get blown up and like or you could, but then you have a vendetta and like a clear case against that faction the next time you
Yeah.
go up against them because like, hey, look, we live by this code of law for a goddamn reason,
Hmm.
and like there's that sense to it as well, which I think is really fun. I think that we should definitely have something similar to that as well.
I was like Chris's, mad robots, like they could be the ones who maybe they're losing sight of that code of conduct too.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's actually yeah, that's a good point. Maybe part of what happens to those people once they've been piloting too long is they start to lose their sense of humanity and
Yeah.
they stop seeing people as people and they're just like, oh, that's just a robot. There's nothing
Hmm.
in there. So they start to waver when it comes to following those laws.
My second point was going to be related to the fact of what it means to be human. And here we have the mech pilots are slowly becoming less and less human and being detached from their humanity. And it kind of had to do with the fact of what I originally thought of as the antagonist, or at least as another group. I know that you don't like other races and everything, but in Robotech, for some reason, I always just fell in love with the fact that there were these giant creatures that were wearing armor as opposed to being giant mechs. And my idea for it was that there would be this weird biomechanical like race that was maybe left over from a progenitor race or something that they fought the wars for them. And they've slowly evolved from a culture that is based on war that they never intended to have any culture other than that, but they slowly gained, I don't want to call it humanity, but they started to gain compassion, art, and other things that they don't really understand because they were machines that were made for war. And as they're becoming more in touch with their quote unquote sentience slash humanity, they are fighting these things that are losing their humanity to fight them.
So I really like the juxtaposition that you have between, you have the people who are losing the humanity and you have this other sentient robot that is gaining some sense of humanity, I suppose. I'm just you're right. I do have a problem with fantasy races because I don't see why we can't have something that isn't like it doesn't have to be some kind of fantastical, like mecha beast or anything like that. And I'm just curious as to what you would think of doing something like uh, this being a human made kind of like this was the first round of trying to get a pilot. Like maybe it's an AI that became sentient. Like I'm going to ask you, like, what do you like so much about a progenitor race of creatures that are essentially giant bio robots?
So they're not the progenitor race themselves. I'm not sure if you ever played the Endless
I have not.
series. Endless Space. They have this race that I think they called the Carvers or the Cravers or something, and they were hyper evolved cybernetic looking insects, and they would just decimate planets like Locust because that's all they knew. And I like the idea of like a rogue servitor kind of something that went kind of off the rails of what it was originally designed to do, and it just got left to its own devices for millennia or something.
Oh, so kind of like this was a species that had like a kind of a natural killer instinct, and perhaps it had at some point interfaced with a species that was more humanistic, and so it went on a path of a different evolution, becoming the mechas. Is that the idea? Like
Yeah,
they
yeah.
ended up.
Like, I would also be fine with humanity of itself was just like, hey, we know bioengineering. What if we made these insects pilot our ships instead of humanity? This way, we wouldn't have to use uh,
Mhm.
people and have them kind of be left as burnt up husk. And then they're like, oh, they have no care for humanity whatsoever from the get go. That was a bad idea.
It explains
Can
the
we
struggle too, like with the robot and the human, in that it's the instinct of the machine, I guess, inherited from its creator that's interfering with humanity, humanness of its pilot.
can we make this can we make this race of other beings essentially be the first colonizers of a far off, like, they essentially, humanity creates this AI or bio, like it's a synth basically, right?
Hmm.
Can we have them make them specific for the specific design to, hey, you're going to go off here in hyperspace and you're going to create colonies for us, and you're not supposed to have humanity, you're not supposed to have emotions, you're simply a drone. And then maybe a lost colony happens, maybe just enough time separated from, you know humanity, where they start to be like, hey, we're our own race now. Like, I would like to try and focus on humans being the source of this.
So
I
in a
would
sense, we
like
sent them out to colonize worlds slash get them ready for us, and it just backfired a bit.
I wouldn't even necessarily call it backfiring. It's more like, like, this is, they just so happen to evolve or develop in such a way that, okay, maybe it did backfire, yeah, okay. It's like, hey, it's like, you send out this particular synthetic race so far ahead to prep worlds for our arrival. And then by the time we get out there, like, hey, we're finally here, guys. And they're like, oh no, we've created our own civilization and we're not going to give it to you now. Something like that. I think that makes for a more interesting story, because then it's our fault. And that juxtaposition between gaining and losing humanity is now thematic in the battles and wars that they fight with one another, because some are fighting to gain their humanity while others are fighting to lose it.
You could
Uh,
even have sympathy of people being just like, hey, we created this consciousness. We're responsible for it. And right now we're trying to wipe it out.
Yeah, I could see that as being a major political talking point. I'm sure that there are factions who are willing to try and make peace with this race that we've created. And I'm sure that there is an equal amount of people who are like, no, we made them for this reason. We're going to take what is ours, like a very colonialist type of, way of approaching it.
I have some questions. So, okay, if we're going down that route, so are the colonists who went out there, is it that technology that they brought with them, that drone technology, eventually evolved and turned into the mechs that we know, or is it that they themselves became their own species because of their symbiosis with the machines, or were they created as an actual synthetic race, like a data sort of situation?
I actually like the idea of the data situation, actually,
Mhm.
where humanity created them for a specific reason. They have served their function as, for the most part, mindless-ish drones, And then now that they're starting to gain sentience and want their independence, I feel like that's a great story to tell in and of itself. And I think that could be a really great starting point.
So they're synthetics. Okay, so if they're synthetics, my follow up question for you guys would be: are they the only ones who know how to use the machines, or is it possible for regular humans to use them, and why now? Or is the madness caused when humans use it as opposed to the synthetic people?
I'd like to have it so it's basically the same machine, it's just how it affects one another,
Yeah.
or how using that mecha changes the synthetic person compared to the human. It's kind of like I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out.
I would be fine with, like, if this was a story arc, you could have it uh, that eventually the humans that go through this process can come out the other side.
Mm-hmm.
But
Like,
no,
is there advantages? Like, if a synthetic uses it, are they not affected by the madness causing stuff, or maybe all the synthetics are mad, and that's just how they are right now.
Or maybe it comes down to being a question of what madness really is, and whether or not these people, or the humans who are experiencing this kind of degradation of their humanity, whether or not it actually is humanity that they're losing, or is it
Right.
matter of a perspective
Like,
change.
have they become like Vulcans or something, and so like we see them as not human in the same sense because they're lacking like emotion, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I imagine that there's a lot to that we can really ask, so I think that's a really good question.
Like, if I guess like I just want to summarize. So like, if the madness is caused in humans from using their technology that we perceive as madness, but they can use it without issue, but although they seem to have already lost their humanity, and that's why they can use it without issue. That's what we're saying, right?
Well, I was imagining that, like there's a synthetic race that pilots these mecha.
Mm-hmm.
When the synthetic race pilots them, they are actually becoming more human,
Oh, I
and
see.
that, yeah, so it's like, it's kind of like,
So it's the
if you look
reverse.
at them as two extremes, the mecha is the one pulling them in the middle, essentially.
So when humans use it though, they lose their humanity, whereas when
Right.
the synthetics use it, they gain humanity.
What do
Yeah.
you guys think about that idea? I think that's a really interesting conceit for a sci-fi plot. What do you guys think?
I like it.
Yeah, I guess like the question I would ask next would be like, why does the machine do that to people? Like, why does it have an inverse reaction? But I mean, that's the thing we can explore, right?
Well, I think Chris's first point made it pretty clear that, like, your when you because it requires full connectivity to
Integration.
like nervous system and everything like that. It's like it's almost cybernetic tech, right?
Mhm.
Where the human body is essentially acting as a cortex or like an AI. So when humanity creates these synthetic creatures, they are void of that. And so when they are in this thing and they're forced to kind of feel things in a robot suit, maybe there are echoes of humans in the suit, and they learn what those emotions and feelings are, and they're
Oh, I
able
see.
to they're
Okay.
able to kind of, actually, that might be an interesting thing where humans deposit themselves, what could be their humanity, and these synthetic creatures are there to absorb it.
I think my point can tie right into that, actually.
Go ahead.
Because so you're suggesting that the machines themselves contain some spark of humanity in them that, when applied to the synthetics, gives them humanity. When applied to humans, maybe it causes a conflict and it like makes them crazier. So the actual thing I had written down was the technology, the mecha technology is either from a distant future or distant past, and it's not fully understood. And there are specific people who are like these mecha sages slash scientists who are really reclusive but really smart, and they're the only ones who know how to repair the machines. So I would think, given what we set up, maybe then the technology being from the quote unquote distant past just means that it was created a long time ago, prior to when we sent colonization out. So that must mean that we don't fully understand the man machine interface, but we know how to use it, and we don't really fully understand why it was designed. Like, why it causes this effect on humans. We just know that it interfaces with some kind of intelligence in the machine, and that's what causes it. And but I do like the idea. Like, my favorite part of this is that you have to rely on these other people to really repair them, and they're not necessarily people that are friendly to outsiders. So it's not like I want to avoid like a situation where you have like warehouses of these robots or factories where they can just be fixed and produced, where it's actually a very difficult talent to learn that takes a lifetime to understand how to repair maybe the neural connections in it and to make a machine whole, which would then make them extremely dangerous to get damaged in combat, because you don't want to have to like, if you damage it too much, you're going to have to go away for a while and get them repaired, and it's a journey unto itself to get them fully repaired.
That's actually my second point as well, is that I really wanted these mecha to be rare. And I think that by having it be a lost technology, or at least a recovered technology, that fits perfectly with my wants and desires surrounding this type of stuff as well.
Yeah.
I love the idea of what is essentially like a faction in and of itself that is neutral, in that they are essentially the keepers of these things, right? Where they
Yeah.
are,
They're like
and
they pass on the art of mecha working or something. Like they're the ones who know it, but they're not really. They all they care about is the technology itself.
yes, and that's in. Are they religious in that sense? Is
Yeah,
there
I
a kind
think
of,
so.
yeah?
I think like they maybe they believe that whatever process created them in the first place was tied to a religion from a long time ago, and they're willing to help like factions that they may not agree with, because all they care about is preserving the technology and the art.
So my I had a second half to mecha should be relatively rare, and that half is actually, and they should not be called mecha. Uh, because I always love when you have like Zone of the Enders, they're called orbital frames.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
like in
Zoids.
obviously they're Gundam, or they're Wanzers in stuff like that, or armored cores. I don't Mecha is
Jaegers.
such a generic, yeah, Jaegers
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Pacific Rim. So I think that if we're going to give them a religious bent, maybe we should call them relics, or and this faction could be reliquaries or
oh,
something
I
like
like
that.
reliquaries. That's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I was definitely seeing like, you take your battered mech to this distant world where there's this one guy who lives on it. It's totally inhospitable, but he has a lab. It's a hell of a journey to get to him, and then he may just say like "fuck off." But if you can convince him to repair the mech because he sees, oh wow, this is a super rare version I haven't seen before, he'll do it, and now you're back in action. That kind of thing.
oh yeah, yeah. I like that a lot. Now you have like because one of my favorite things in mecha fiction is not necessarily all of the robot punching. It's the
Mhm.
stories in between. The
Yeah.
stuff where it's like, holy shit, we're so beaten up. We just have to make it to this next waypoint to get to like, and then there's that like tension, and there's that kind of excitement and adventure in just getting there, knowing that you don't even necessarily have your most powerful weapon available and ready. Like
Well,
that is
it makes battles extremely dangerous. Like that's what I liked about Mech Warrior's
absolutely.
strategy, is that one hit could really destroy your mech, and so these combats are super dangerous, not only because that could happen, but also because like you may not be able to fix it after this. Like you may just be screwed. You may not be able to get off the planet and find the repair person to fix it. And it just ups the level of danger.
Yeah, I
Yes.
believe in MechWarrior, one of the other things was just some of the lost technology that you've kind of duct taped together, like drop ships were incredibly rare. But
Yeah.
and so if you had one, you had an advantage because you could field more mechs. But if you
Mhm.
lost that drop ship, it was just like, oh no, we just lost a fourth of our combat capabilities.
Like, did you guys see the Dark Tower series?
Yes.
So like the feeling I'm getting from what you guys are describing is like the way that the gunslinger culture operates. That they're journeymen, but they're also like chivalrous, and it's also like very deadly the lives they live. Like that I kind of like, but I'm picturing instead of a horse, you're on a mech, and it's your sacred mech.
Yeah. Oh man, there is a lot that we're kind of putting all together now, right?
This
So
was your
imagine
father's
that.
mech.
Yes. Oh my god, I love that.
Yeah. Oh man, this is okay. This is really coming together. This is fucking cool. So one of the things that we've kind of implied here, by the way, is that there is now like the vastness of space that humanity has started to colonize.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of something that's like a sub point, but I think that's also important as well.
and this other synth like species that's out there that may be like a kind of mysterious faction alongside all the political maneuvering that's happening on Earth and its colonies. You know, we were talking a lot about how we're building kind of a culture around the mecha and its sacredness. So maybe we should enshrine that. This is a point I had where an entire world and this is a big shift. So I don't know how we feel about this, but entire worlds, it must be worlds because we've established it's interstellar, might revere or view as a hero an individual mech, because I was perceiving these individual mechs as having a tremendous amount of power. Like, you could devastate like an entire multiple cities, so like Star Trek level power, in the sense that these aren't just, since they're super rare, they're not just like you're gonna have a battle with 150 mechs. You'll have a battle with like three or four, and it's a devastating battle. So the idea is that there's entire the faction might be surrounding propping up a single mech because of its rarity, and there might be cults that follow a particular single mech, or a single relic, we should say. So because of their rarity.
So that's not what Star Trek Discovery tells me. I've seen a bunch of starship battles in Star
How
Trek
could you watch
Discovery.
Star Trek Discovery? I'm talking
I
about, how dare you? How dare you? I'm talking about the Enterprise, where a single phaser beam from it, or whatever you call it, I forget what they're called.
A photon torpedo, I believe.
Yeah, like a single blast could literally devastate a planet. Like that's the kind of power the Enterprise has. Well, I'm picturing maybe not world destroying, because that might be over the top, but the idea that like a single mech has the firepower to really devastate cities, like multiple cities.
If we're going to do this and we have these synthetic beings already, why don't we have the very important mech, or sorry, the very important relic? Why don't we just have it be the leader of the synthetic rebellion?
Ooh, yeah, that would be cool.
So it's important and it's a hero to some, but to humanity, probably not so much. Yeah. So you can have like a split, galaxy where there are the synthetics and then there's the humans, and then I just like the idea of blurring the line between who the good air quotes faction is compared to, like I one of my favorite things about another great non mecha but still a great sci-fi anime is The Legend of Galactic Heroes, and the question that they ask in that is fantastic, and it is it better to have a corrupt democracy, or is it better to have a benevolent dictatorship?
Right.
And the series explores that in every conceivable way, and it is one of the best anime around for that reason.
I've never seen that one before.
It's one of those ones that everyone likes but no one watches because it's from like the 80s and it looks kind of dog shit, and like no one is willing to go back that far, but it's actually fantastic. And the fact that they pull in and pull out, so like the way that the camera moves, right? It's not like you're just focused on a general. You're like, okay, here's the general here. And then that general makes a decision. And then the next episode is following the repercussions of that general's decision through another character on a planet that it's happening on.
Oh.
It's actually fantastic. It's very, very good.
Let's check that one out.
You should.
I like that.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's really, really good.
Super good.
Let's see. It's so good. Let's see. What else do we want to talk about? So I guess my point surrounding all that is this now becoming a synthetic versus human type of story? Is that the story that we want to tell? Or do we want to have it be a little bit more complex? Where do we want to go with that concept?
I'm seeing it as, what does it mean to be human?
That's one of the themes that I'd really like to stick to. But is the conflict really that important right now, or is it maybe that's happened in the past? What do you?
I want to push against that in terms of because I think there's too many stories that are synthetics versus humans. Like that's so like trite. So like while the presence of the synthetics is fine, I think that they add a cool wrinkle. I don't think the primary conflict should be with them.
I agree with that. I agree with that. So what that actually segues perfectly into my third point. And yes, motherfuckers, I did plan all of this ahead. I played you. My my third point is the main conflict in this setting should have humans behind it, or at least a human-like intelligence.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and figure out what the main conflict in this setting is going to be then.
Whatever it is, I agree, and I think it should have some deep political maneuvering involved. Like it should be an internal affair, to humanity.
All right, so let's take this. So the synthetic thing that exists, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can we fast forward to the point past the conflict where the synthetic people and the humans are together living in relative harmony, and now it's a matter of humans and synth alliance, and that's kind of the political
Yeah, I can
uh
see that. Yeah.
yeah, like that's it's kind of like we get past the trite part and get to the part where you know you know how a lot of stories tend to yada 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 the end of their story rather than actually go through with, oh, this would be way more difficult than you think it would be,
Yeah,
that kind
like
of thing.
creating Star Trek.
Yeah, exactly. So
Federation.
let's start there. Like let's start. So we have giant relics, and we have this synth human alliance, and we have galaxies worth of. So what's the conflict going to be if it's not synthetic human, and part of it is like humanity and everything like that? What is going to that's the philosophical
Mhm.
like conflict is humanity, or what it means to be human, right? So what's the physical conflict that we're experiencing now?
I mean, we know that the mechs are world destroying too. Not world destroying, but devastating. So it's like even using them in war is like a big question. It's like dropping nuclear weapons. Like, so whatever conflicts happen, they have to be either really important or not often, or maybe they scale back the way they do the fighting.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. I think that uh, these things should be treated like nukes. Like no
Mm-hmm.
one wants to. You really don't want to pull them out unless you have to.
Yeah.
Um, but what can we do that involves their consistent use? What would
Well, we can go back to colonization. So maybe they haven't spanned whole galaxies yet. Maybe these alliances have been established, and we've created some stability with the synthetics and among our own faction, our own nations. But there's still active colonization happening. Maybe the mechs are used primarily in the effort of exploration and colonization, and they do get into skirmishes with each other. But the things they're facing out there are strange and weird and dangerous.
hmm.
Like that's when you can bring in your kaiju.
What
Right,
about
but
all?
what right, but wouldn't the third point that I'm trying to make, that the main conflict is between humans, like
Oh, well, I mean, as you in the sense of having them being frequently used. So, for example, say you have like two factions that are politically vying over a new system to colonize, and acquiring the system is huge for faction A because it means they're going to have more political influence over the sector. So they send their mechs out to get to it before the other faction. So now they don't want to actually have open combat with the other mechs because that can be devastating. So they get out there, and it's like a game of like cat and mouse of who can get to the waypoint first and claim the space, claim the planet maybe. But on that planet, there happen to be like 7,000-ton kaiju that eat people, so they also have to deal with that. So that way you can have stories where there's a lot of side stuff happening that's like use of the mech, so we get to see them being cool, but also like the main conflict is the political maneuvering.
I like that, and especially if we can kind of do a mixture of nation states and corporations.
Mm-hmm.
Like you get, like there are going to be corporations who are like, we're not part of any governmental system, but we are in charge of these relics that we've acquired. I think that is far more interesting than, like, hey, I don't like you, you don't like me, let's punch it out in mecha. I think that the grab for resources is actually one of the smartest things that we can do here, Daniel. I think that's a really good point.
Hmm.
Chris?
Well, one of the things that I was going to say that you could do is the fact that if humanity had a fast expansion, maybe things are only starting to catch up where people can now get out there within a reasonable amount of time. So there's all these kind of little republics that have formed, and the
Mhm.
centralized one wants to bring them to heel. And so there's this whole kind of classic Gundam bringing the colonies back into the fold.
Oh, I like
Mhm.
that. Yeah, because now you have like a major superpower, and then you have like various factions that are might be rebels, might be aligned with it, might be corporations taking advantage.
Yeah,
He's
and
right.
it could be
Yeah.
like, hey, you agreed to this that you would when you got it just like, yeah, but that was my great great grandfather's
Exactly.
dream, and it's just like, yes, but that's how you were born. So you owe
And that's
us.
the code of conduct. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I'm getting some strong senses of Legend of the Galactic Heroes again, so that's good. That's a really good thing. Um,
Well, I love that. I think that that's a
okay.
cool, like, it gives a lot of
Yeah.
diversity to the whole way it's set up.
Yeah, that's okay. Now it's starting to kind of come together.
My point has been brought up already with religion. You kind of did the opposite end of what I wanted to do. Originally, I had it that the synthetic race or anything has taken the first few commandments, as it were, or commands that it was given, and have uh, internalized that as religious dogma. And part of the disconnect that they or the disagreement they have with humanity is they don't see us as their true creator, and no amount of proof will really make them believe that.
That's cool. I don't think that's in conflict at all with everything
Nope.
Not at
else.
all.
I
Yeah.
was just like, maybe we're doing too much religion.
No, like, because it makes sense that
No.
the synthetics would have a religion as well because we created them.
But
Yeah.
they're just
Eh,
like, you're flawed. You can't be our creator. No, no, come on. We have your schematics right here. Shut up. No.
And
Yeah.
since people don't really know
Exactly.
the past, they can't prove it.
Right. I think that's a really smart way to do it as well. And not only that, but I mean, you have their shared religiosity towards the relics as well. So I
Um,
think that's a really smart way to kind of incorporate that too.
yeah, I could see that.
It also like lets you flesh out that because like you don't want the synthetics to be like every other synthetics race and every other sci-fi. Like I'm looking at you, Picard, my hated nemesis. You want them to be like if I could make them like any other species, then that would be good. Like if they can be as complicated as the Romulans or as complicated as the Vulcans, even though they're kind of one note too, like there's a lot of complexity in how their society functions. So if they have their own like religion that's based on the original directives of humanity, which humanity has forgotten, that's cool because now they can say to humanity, like, what are you even talking about? Like, we know what you believed in. And the people who made us, we're very different than you, so you can't possibly be the people who made us, that kind of
You
thing.
were the creators. You have fallen far from it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
that's a
like
great
this. I
point.
like it.
They must be very
And, and,
haughty, those people.
and then of
Religious
course
zealot robots.
right,
Yeah.
and then of course the synthetic race can also look and have conflict within their, because no people are a monolith.
Yeah,
They can
exactly.
sit there and be like, I don't really care about the religious aspect, like they probably are, and there's all sorts of conflict that you can kind of
Mhm.
play around with there as well.
Because you probably also have synthetics in crews in other factions who are like not part of the larger monoculture.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now you have the
Absolutely.
neo-orthodox ones who are just like, yeah, they are the creator, but we're actually worshiping their creator as well.
Uh-huh. Or like humans aren't that bad. I want to learn how to be more human. You got your data kind of character.
Oh man, or you can, and then eventually we can then create the third god,
Mhm.
so it's, this is the synthetic god, this is the human god, and this is the synthesis between the two. It's the
Whoop,
perfect being between the two of them.
Yeah.
stay away from Mass Effect 3 ending.
I never played Mass Effect,
Oh,
so
all right.
yeah.
Well, let's see if you accidentally do it.
Picard accidentally did it. By accidentally, I mean deliberately because they're bankrupt. Oh, yeah.
Creatively bankrupt. They
Yeah.
had a they had some effects on that. I saw it. I
No, they
saw
Yeah,
had
it. I
money.
he
thought it
was
was
That's
good.
for
All right, let's see. Daniel, go ahead and take us home with your final point.
This one, to a certain degree, we've also covered, but I just want to give more weight to it, an emphasis. We established that the relics are rare, and we established that they're unique. But I want to say like they're very unique. Like they're not only are they the only commonality between them is that they have a man machine interface that causes Chris's quote unquote like loss of humanity or gaining of humanity, like the dissonance effect, whatever you want to call it. So that's the only commonality. But other than
I think we're
that, they
calling it the dissonance
Yeah,
effect
that was
because that
good.
sounds really cool. Yeah.
so other than the fact that they have a dissonance effect, and that they are a shell for the pilot, they have different personalities, they have different power sources, they have different designs and materials because the schematic of the dissonance, the schematic for the mental connection is the same unknown technology, but over the years, these mechs have been built completely differently, and that's why those reliquaries out there are the only ones you can really turn to understand your own technology, because there's been so many artisans who followed the same idea in terms of building them, but they use different methods, so completely different materials. They rely on different power sources. So that's the one thing I like about Pacific Rim is there's a lot of variety in the types of mechs that even like Mech Warrior doesn't have, because at the end of the day, they're still like nuclear powered robots. So like what I'm looking for here is like not only are they totally alien to each other, but the interface, when you interface with them, they have different personalities too. So like there's identities you have when you're with the relic.
That's actually one of the points that I wanted to follow up on is they're individuals. It's
Yeah,
not they're almost living in that, they each have their own name. And
yeah,
and what I actually liked what you said before is, they're not all just nuclear powered robots. Let's
hmm,
make it so each different relic has a different power source. Not every
yeah,
one individually, but let's make it so it's not just this is the same frame with a
hmm,
different, weapon this
yeah.
time.
That's what I'm going for. Like I
Yeah,
would
I'm
love
getting
it
a
if
Big
like
O feel from that.
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. We can do something like Big O is another great one. That's a good
Oh
point.
yeah, yeah. Big O's good.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense because, in the 15th century, you might have had nuclear technology. In the 700th century, you might have had like some other technology that nobody's ever heard of. It's a different energy source.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
because they're such rare machines, like that, they're comparable in terms of what they're capable of doing. They were meant to be devastating machines.
Dimensional
Mhm.
jump drive.
Yeah, yeah. Some of them are starfighters. Some of them, are bigger than others. That kind of thing.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
like going through MechWarrior where they had like the ones that were bipedal, quadpedal,
Yeah,
the ones that were like the weird, they could change between a tank and being a mech kind of
yeah,
thing. Have all of those.
Yeah.
exactly.
I think that, the other really interesting aspect that brings up is that you could go to a reliquary and be like, "Hey, my neck, my relic needs fixing," and they're like, "Oh no, I don't deal with this type of relic. You're gonna have to go,
I don't know what to do
go
with
see."
this.
Yeah, they're like,
Hey,
"I
best
what
I
is?"
can do is give you a hoverboard leg. That's all we
Yeah,
have.
Like
I
the
mean,
only thing in common that I want reliquaries to have is that they understand the neural interface, but that's it.
I actually think that there's some generic patchwork that they can do, but it's more
Yeah.
like I have no idea what this is. You're gonna have to go see this guy at this end of the galaxy. So
Yeah.
I can patch this up, but you better not get into a fight, otherwise you're really gonna fuck this
I
thing
love
up
that
bad.
so
You're gonna
much.
have to
Yeah.
drop like half a ton of armor if you want me to put these legs on it, and that's gonna
Yeah.
really change your fighting style.
Like, I guess we can do this, but you're not gonna like it.
Yeah, and imagine that you're losing like a signature weapon or ability just because it's like I just don't have the parts for this. I just don't know
Yeah.
how to fix this thing. And so you're walking around with like it's it's kind of like when you see like bootleg name brands. So it's not
Mhm.
a Rolex, it's a Rolex,
Yeah.
So it's like
He's like, I got this Rolex leg. I know it's not the real thing, but it's gonna
Got
get
it.
you 2 systems over.
yeah, it'll get you to where you need to be. Don't worry
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
And there could be
Well,
diversity among those guys too. Like you could have like corporate reliquaries who are less scrupulous, but they also like are love to collect, knowledge of the mechs too.
oh, they're more willing to give you the shitty cheap parts, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely a thing. Oh man, yeah, I love the diversity in the reliquaries already. That's cool. Um, well, gentlemen, I think we've got the basis for a pretty cool mecha setting. What do you think?
Yeah.
I'm down.
All
I'm
right.
down with it. Yeah.
Yeah, fuck yeah. All right. Come listen next week when we figure out some more stuff about this cool ass mecha setting. And if you want to introduce or suggest your own cool ass setting, you can always email us at worldbuildwithus@gmail.com, or you can go ahead and shoot us a tweet at Let's World Build. Follow us there too. That's cool. You don't have to, but we
Okay.
post some funny things every now and then. So until next time, remember that we love you very much. Remember that we love you very much, and we're gonna make it through.